See? I have all my paperwork. Yes, indubitably. But you see, this is Vampire 101, where vampires learn to hone their skills. But I am a vampire. No. You're some sort of soul reaver. Hello, welcome back to Gamebox, the show where we take a look at games of yesteryear. And today, we'll be taking a look at a game from the PlayStation 1 era, and at part 2 of the triple partnership between Silicon Knights, Crystal Dynamics, and Activision, and also taking a look at the sequel that was spawned from that event, a little game called Legacy of Kain, Soul Reaver. Developed by Crystal Dynamics and published by Eidos Interactive. Now, you may have noticed a name missing. Well, let's jump into that. After the success of Blood Omen, a sequel was to be expected, a sequel that was funded by Activision and was given to Crystal Dynamics to develop, though apparently the work that was presented was subpar, leading Activision to go to Silicon Knights to get the ball rolling. This in turn pitted Silicon Knights and Crystal Dynamics against each other for Daddy Activision's attention. There were some more allegations cropping up during this time, saying that Crystal Dynamics failed to inform Silicon Knights they were leaving the publishing gig and entering the development game. Also stating that Crystal Dynamics' deal with Activision to publish Blood Omen dismissed Silicon Knights' right to refuse a sequel, meaning that a sequel could be made with or without Silicon Knights' involvement. The allegations also stated that Crystal Dynamics poached employees, minimalized Silicon Knights' involvement in the development of Blood Omen, even potentially stealing game concepts. At this point, Crystal Dynamics had been published by Eidos Interactive, and the Legacy of Kain IP was either abandoned or sold. Either way, Eidos Interactive got their hands on it. Once this happened, both game projects were cancelled. A year later, Crystal Dynamics had begun development on a new game called Shifter. This game would have had players take control of an undead creature that was brought back from the dead for vengeance, and has the ability to shift between the spectral and material realm. This adventure would have taken place in a steampunk/fantasy world. This concept would later be integrated into the Legacy of Kain universe, being called Soul Reaver. Upon the announcement of Soul Reaver, Silicon Knights would later file an injunction against Crystal Dynamics in order to prevent the game from being published. Silicon Knights also claimed that Crystal Dynamics stole the concept for Kain 2 that was in development by Silicon Knights. The lawsuit, as well as other delays, ended up pushing Soul Reaver's initial release from October 1998 to August 1999, but in the end, the dispute was settled and Legacy of Kain stayed with good old Crystal Dynamics, and Silicon Knights would never work on Legacy of Kain again. So yeah, that was a whole thing. Fun fact, when I was a wee lad, I remember seeing an issue of PlayStation Magazine with Raziel's face plastered on the cover. Even with the name of the game right there in black and white, my brain went, "Oh look, that's Leon S. Kennedy. I wonder what happened to make him look like that." Now at the time, I was playing Resident Evil 2, and by that I mean I was watching my brother play Resident Evil 2. But I was present, and that's all that matters. These two games are not the same developers. Hell, not even the same genre. It's like if you looked at a picture from Ralphie from A Christmas Story, then looked at a picture of Arnold Schwarzenegger and thought, "Man, Ralphie sure got ripped. I wonder what happened to make him look like that." Yes, this actually happened. Prior to Soul Reaver, Crystal Dynamics worked on several titles that include Pandemonium, Gex, Enter the Gecko, and Akuji the Heartless. After Soul Reaver, they would later become known as developers for the Tomb Raider series. Anywho, Soul Reaver was released on August 16, 1999 in the US, and later that year in Europe for the PlayStation 1, and September 8, 1999 for Windows, and finally January 27, 2000 for the Dreamcast. Anyone remember that thing? Yeah? No? Oh, thought I saw a hand. Soul Reaver was met with mostly good scores, so with all that, let's take a look at today's game.
Kain is deified. The clans tell tales of him.
Soul Reaver takes place 1500 years after the events of Blood Omen. It also disregards the ending of Blood Omen, that being the player choice on the fate of Nosgoth, something I completely forgot to mention in my Blood Omen review. Kain has become the new ruler of Nosgoth, and he is approached in his throne room by Raziel, one of Kain's lieutenants. Raziel presents Kain with his newly grown wings. This act angers Kain, and he destroys Raziel's wings. Kain orders him to be thrown into the Lake of the Dead. Raziel sinks to the bottom, and that is where he would lay for 500 years. After this time, Raziel is brought back by an ancient being known as the Elder God. Upon his revival, Raziel ceases being a vampire, instead becoming a wraith. The Elder God gives Raziel the task of killing Kain and restore order to the decaying world, and repay Kain for banishing him all those years ago. Soul Reaver is a third-person action-adventure game. Where Blood Omen was in the style of a 2D top-down game, Soul Reaver made the giant leap to 3D, and in doing so, the gameplay had to change as well. Razio has more freedom of movement this time around, meaning he can jump, run, and punch. Razio can also use weapons he finds lying around in the environment, something I found out by accident. I highly recommend that you keep a weapon on you any chance you get. Razio can also lock onto his enemies, making his swings less wild. This also lets him dodge around, which was definitely a lot faster than this. And it did offer more to combat, that being that enemies can only be defeated by throwing them in water, impaling them, or tossing them into sunlight. It was cool to see Razio use his own weaknesses against his enemies, though later in the game I just ended up impaling any enemy I came across. Razio also has the ability to shift between the spectral and material realms. Doing so will morph the environments to help Razio move about the levels. So like Cain, Razio does have more tricks up his sleeves to help him in combat. He can use glyphs, which are completely optional, but I highly recommend to go seek them out. Glyphs are this game's version of magic. There's the Force Glyph, which pushes enemies back, the Stone Glyph, which will freeze enemies making them vulnerable to being shattered, which can only be done with the weapon in hand, the Sound Glyph, which will stun enemies it hits, the Fire Glyph, which burns surrounding enemies, finally the Water Glyph, which honestly I'm not sure what it even does beyond making enemies think they're at a rave. Each new glyph that is unlocked increases Razio's magic capacity, which is good because each glyph costs an increasing amount of magic to use. Razio is also able to use the Soul Reaver, a weapon that was introduced back in Blood Omen. It is a powerful weapon, but if Razio gets hit, he will lose the ability to use the weapon. Razio can also acquire a fire upgrade for the Soul Reaver, which powers up the weapon even more, allowing Razio to stun enemies in one hit. Speaking of enemies, there is a variety to deal with. Some are basic bitches, while others had different attacks to try and stop Razio. On a side note, I hated the gremlin looking enemies that shoot burps at Razio. I almost always got hit by these attacks, resulting in me losing the Soul Reaver, and making me run around for a weapon to try and fight them with. Or I just slap them till I stun them and ran away. Enemies can be downed, but Razio needs to consume their soul in order to keep them down, otherwise they'll come back and keep fighting. Souls are the lifeblood in Soul Reaver, like how blood was in Blood Omen. Razio can also upgrade his health by collecting 5 pieces of a cinnamon roll. As far as exploration, there's a standard affair. Razio can run, perform a high jump, even glide using his bust up wings. There's also a sneak button that I never really used the way it was supposed to be. The platforming in this game did annoy me. Yeah, I know, a shocker. It worked fine when Razio was leaping over gaps or jumping over obstacles, but not so much when precision was required. I spent way too much time on this dumb pole crossing section, and that was due to the jumping mechanics. Going back to the sneak button, I usually use the sneaking mechanic to get close as possible to the edge of a platform before making my jumps, but this still didn't help at times. There are puzzles in Soul Reaver, though the majority of them are block puzzles. In my usual fashion, I did cheese my way through the clock puzzle toward the end of the game. One thing I did find amazing was the fact that old Razio can flip blocks, even being able to flip blocks on top of other blocks. I'm easily amused. This actually came back to bite me in the ass when I tried to get the Stone Glyph. I accidentally flipped a block onto another block, and having no way to get it back down, I had to leave and come back later. The cool thing is, the shift ability can be used to solve some of the puzzles. There are also warp gates that Razio can unlock as he explores the world. This is another thing I highly recommend finding. These allow Razio to travel back to previously visited areas. This is very useful. Okay, let's talk about the bosses. And once again, we walk down that familiar path to posies and rainbows. Almost all the boss fights were easy as hell. I say almost. There were 2 fights that gave me some trouble. One was a fight with Rahab. This wasn't due to the fight itself. It was because the fight required Razalistus to jump from platform to platform and shatter glass windows, all while trying not to get hit by the boss. And if you did get hit, you end up falling into the surrounding water and get transferred back to the spectral realm, and then have to climb back up the pillars, which made you utilize the wonky jumping controls. The other fight was a fight with Duma. This wasn't really a fight outright, which I didn't know and tried wailing on him and ended up dying, which happened to be one of the 3 times that I died in this game. The other 2 happened in the same place, the Lake of the Dead, and happened the same way, by jumping in. I misunderstood directions given, moving on. The fight with Duma had Razio bait Duma into a chase in order to lead him to a second death. This was an interesting change from simply slapping the boss around. The cool thing about the boss fights, they reward Razio with progression abilities, Some of the fights did incorporate environmental deaths for the bosses, so that was cool to see. Soul Reaver is a 3D action adventure game, and it does feel like it. The locations did vary, from torchlit tombs to a snow-covered ghost town. The color use was interesting. It did have the usual draw distance fog thing, but it was cool to see the pillars from Blood Omen again. The intro cutscene for Soul Reaver still holds up in my opinion. There were some minor glitches, like when I accidentally did a boundary break in the lighthouse section, but beyond that, the game ran fine. So all in all, is this a game you need to go out and play? I'm going to give a hard yes. There were plenty of things that were frustrating about it. The jumping wasn't fun, the bosses were easy, but they did give useful rewards that encouraged exploration. The backtracking wasn't too bad, and like Blood Omen, it was fun to discover secrets. The overuse of block puzzles did get a wee bit tiring, though it was cool to see the shift ability being used to solve some platforming and puzzles. I even tried to switch to analog controls to make the platforming a bit easier, but that didn't work. Now, there were reports stating that there was cut content from Soul Reaver. This included locations, more glyphs, and upgrades to the Soul Reaver weapon. Some of the locations included the Light River Forge, Ancient Sewers, and Stone River Forge, just to name a few. The cut also included new forms for the Soul Reaver. One of the abilities that was cut was the ability to shift at will, which I think was for the best as it may have made the game a bit too easy. But even with the cut content and loose jumping feel, and the to be continued ending, beyond all that, I still had fun with it. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have a ladder to climb.
Darkness and silence through the night. What a thrill.
What the hell was that? Hey, welcome to the end of the video. I thank you for making it this far. If you want to see behind the scenes look at all this shiz nasty, I have a Twitter and Instagram, links in the description. Now there are more games in this series, which I will be covering. However, at the time of writing this script, I don't have them. But when I do, you can be damn skippy, I'll be making videos on them. But till then, you know what to do. Spread the awesome, and I'll see you next time.